Hey, how's it going? My name is Neil Parfit, and welcome to Getting Started with the ER301 Sound Computer. This is video number 0.4, number 1, and it is covering the new 0.4 OS that has come out in the last month or so. And this video is aimed at new users who have never used this module before, just starting right from the beginning. We're going to just go over all the buttons, all the connectivity, and just how to build something really simple so you can get used to how all the navigation works. And if you're an experienced user, wait for video number 2, because then I'll just go over the specific new stuff that has been introduced since 0.4. So, getting going, let's dive in. So you've unboxed it from that beautiful wooden box, you've taken it out of the anti-static, you've popped it into your modular, and now what do you do? So, few things just to get going. Make sure, just for the sake of if you're following along, patch into output number 1, which is the top right connector, and patch that into your monitoring destination, like a mixer or a speaker or something. Second to that, you have 2 switches on the bottom here. The leftmost switch, set it to user, which is the upmost position, and the mode, set that to the middle, called edit, and then fire it up. So I'm going to do that now. It takes about 10 seconds for it to boot up, so we'll wait for that to happen. So, what is the sound computer? And the answer to that is, it can almost be anything you need it to be in the course of music production and sound manipulation. Basically, it's sort of like a micro sound computer. You patch audio or CV into it. You can manipulate it in various ways. And if it's CV, it stays within the inside because the outputs are not DC coupled. If you're processing audio, then you have 4 audio outputs. And 1, 2, 3, 4. The way it's set up is there's 4 sort of processing tracks, if you want to call it that. I don't think that's the official word, but I'll just call it that. Each track is here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one of them has a gate, an audio input, and an audio output. And you can toggle between them by just pressing this track select button to the left of it. And you'll notice if I've hit this button for number 4, that's lit up and it says output 4 here. And if I hit that one, I'm on out 2, etc. This screen up here is where you're going to do 90% of your work. I'll get into it, but pretty much everything you need to see and visualize is on this screen. The main screen, the sub screen down here, offers a combination of like submenus and options and ways to tweak stuff that's on the main primary screen. So right now, we're in mono operation for each one of these. If by chance you want to work in stereo, all you have to do is just press 2 tracks, and all of a sudden you'll see a link light. And now, if I'm on either one of these, you'll notice on the screen that this doesn't change. This is a stereo linked track. I can unlink it again by just pressing these 2 buttons. And I could decide, you know what, maybe I want number 1 mono and I want number 2 and 3 stereo. So I can just hit those guys. And same thing, we got a link button there. If I want to unlink it, same thing. And let's say I wanted 2 stereo pairs. I could just link these 2 and then link these 2. So it really just depends on what you want to do. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to stick to mono operation. So I'm going to unlink these and unlink those. And I'm going to make sure I'm on number 1 because I'm patched to output number 1. So I want to be able to hear what I'm doing. So let's look at what we have. The whole idea of this module is everything works in processing chains. So a chain is, you could almost think of it like adding plugins in a sequence. And the way this system works is signal comes in the left and flows right to the output of this chain. We're on the parentmost level of this track. So if we insert a unit, which is the 301's sort of plugin name, let's do that. The most important thing that I need to tell you is you're going to be using this encoder a lot. This is sort of You're navigating around with it. You'll use it to tweak virtual faders and parameters, and it's really quick and a lot of fun. So first things first, let's say we want to insert a unit. All you have to do, just navigate with this encoder till you're in that open area. And then you'll notice on the bottom screen it says insert. So if you see that below this S3 key, you press that button. And right away we get taken into a menu of all the units that are available on the system. Yours might look slightly different because I have a few additional units here, but the idea is the same. Everything's organized into certain categories. So we have essentials like VCAs, offset. We can skim down to delays. You'll notice I have a bunch of delays here. We can go down to filters. We have a bunch of different filter types. And so as an example, maybe let's start off with an oscillator. So I'm just going to scroll around. Here we go. So in our oscillator list, it's showing we have 4 things here. We have a sine, aliasing triangle, and an aliasing saw. You might not see this one, so I'm not going to go to that one for now. But let's say I wanted to add a saw wave. So if this menu is highlighted, all I have to do to add that unit into our chain is just hit the soft key underneath it. So again, if I'm navigating around and I'm like, you know what, I want that saw, I just hit the soft key below it. And there we go. Instantly, you can see on the meter, we have audio going out. There it is. And the cool thing is, if we scroll to the right of the unit, the bottom screen shows us a scope of what the audio or CV is doing. So in our case, we have a saw wave, and there it is. So if I want to adjust parameters, all I have to do is use this encoder again, just skim to what I want, press the M key below the parameter I want, and then I can just start using the encoder again to tweak it. So if I wanted to adjust the level, I could just go to level, press it, the M key, and there, I have instant control of that parameter. Speaking of control, if I am using this encoder, there's different modes of how sensitive the knob is. If I have it on fine, I have a more sensitive adjustment. If I hold down shift while moving it, I even have a more sensitive adjustment. And the same thing goes if I'm on coarse. So if I'm on coarse, it's a little bit more drastic. If I hold down shift again, it's even more drastic. So you basically have 4 levels of control here to really tweak what you want to really dial in a setting you want. Another way you can dial it in is, notice as I'm changing this level, it's showing it to us right here as well as bias. And we'll get into that in a minute. But if I actually hit the S key below that, now I have a big numeric entry screen. So I can really go in here and pick exactly what I want. Let's say I wanted that level to be exactly 0.526. So I could literally go to each column here and just dial it in. And then I just hit enter right here to take that setting. And there we go, exactly 0.526. This sound isn't that exciting so far because it's just a static waveform. So let's talk about the most important thing when dealing with the 301 process. The idea is you can basically assign external CV or audio to a parameter of your choice. So let's do that. Let's say right now I have my KB37 hooked up. I have all these inputs here, and they're in banks, A, B, C, and D. Each one of these has 3 CVs. And you can see it. My gate for the CV, my gate for the KB37 is on A1. Below that on A2, you can see the light going lower and higher. That's actually my 1 volt per octave control. And how do we access those? So this is the other most important thing. I'm just going to turn the speaker down a little bit. So this is the other most important concept on the 301. So we have a main chain here, and if we want to assign something here, we go into a subchain, which is like one level deeper. So if I want to assign something to this 1 volt per octave parameter, see this empty bit here? That takes us into the subchain. So if I press S1 below this empty bit, now we're into a completely different chain. And this is where it gets really interesting and the sort of rabbit hole begins of exploration. So right here, I can set a chain input, and that input can be an internal process or it can be a physical input here. So I want to be able to tap off of A number 2. So all I have to do is just hit the M key below this bit right here. And now this is a screen we haven't seen before. This is sort of our selection area. I can choose between jacks, locals, which we'll get to, but let's start with jacks. Basically, this scope right here represents all the physical inputs on the system. So notice as I'm playing my keyboard here, A1's blipping because we have our gate signal there, and A2 is our 1 volt per octave. So if I want to assign one of those, let's go one step deeper. I'll press the M key right below it. It expands it, so now we can really see on the scope what's happening. So if I want to use A2, all I have to do is just press the M key below it, and that's it. We have instant control over our 1 volt per octave. So if we're done here, all we have to do is press up, and that takes us back to our primary unit again here, our primary chain. And notice here, we're still hovering over 1 volt an octave, and it's telling us, hey, A2 is our source. So this is where it gets interesting. You can go back in there. I'll just go back in. What if I want to add another process to manipulate that CV coming in from the outside? So just like before, we're in a subchain. We can insert a unit here. So I'll just go to this empty bit, hit insert. Here's our common list again. And notice that our most recent thing we added bubbles to the top, which is great. So if you're doing some repetitive tasks, your most often used units will just bubble to the top for quick selection. In my case here, I want to add a slew limiter just to get a little bit of portamento happening. So now we have our A2 CV control. It's being fed through this slew limiter, and depending on how we set this parameter, that's how it's going to affect that CV signal. So let's take a listen. Oh, that's too much. So right now on course, it's a little bit hard to adjust, so I can just hit fine. And there you go. This is all real time. I don't have to wait for it to render or anything. There you go. So we have a subchain controlling our pitch CV. If we go back out, we just have our never-ending saw wave playing. This is gonna, sorry, I have to hit stop and then hit start again because my camera's gonna run out of space. So I'll be right back. So we're back. So far we've added a saw oscillator, and within that, on the voltage control, on the subchain of that voltage per octave control, we've added an input source of A number 2, which is the pitch output of my KB37, and that in turn is being processed by a slew limiter unit. Some menus, you'll see some parameters where the smaller screen will tie into it. So here's an example where the slew limiter is like, oh, we got a mode, we got both. Or if we hover over that, now we have control. We can have it, only process the up portion, the down portion, or both. And you can notice that when I press this down here, these just react accordingly. So the cool thing is you can just play around in real time and just pick the one you want. There's no waiting, there's no clicks or anything like that. It just does what it does and you're done. So next step, let's back out of here. So remember, if you're in a subchain at any point, up will take you one level back. So far we only have 2 levels. We have our primary parent level of this out strip, and then within the octave control, or within within the pitch control of this aliasing saw, we have our other subchain. But you can have subchains anywhere you want, and you'll notice that anytime you hover over something and you have this empty bit below, that means you can add a subchain. So here's another example if we were to do something really simple. This level control is actually a VCA. So what if we want to control this VCA? We don't want to open all the time, so let's zero that parameter. You can hold down Shift and you can press 0, and now we're at 0. So how do we, oh, that's my cat. I want a gate from my KB37 to control this level. So all I have to do is go within this level subchain, and that's my cat again. I'm going to go to the input sign right here, and I want to use my A1 gate. So I'm going to expand that. You can see it right there as I'm pressing a key, and there's my gate signal. But notice how there is the gate there, but nothing's happening yet. And that's the other most important part of subchains when you're controlling a fader or a parameter. So check this out. So our bias right now is set to 0. That means just the resting spot of that fader. We have to be able to take this signal, apply gain to it, and in turn, that's how much it's going to affect that parameter. So check this out. If I'm on gain, our main fader is the left one, and the right little tiny fader there, that's just showing you what the CV is doing to that fader. So watch what happens when I turn up the gain. I'm just going to keep pressing the key here. Notice how you can see it jumping up and down. So basically, this gain control, if I have that set to 1, that means the signal that's in this subchain is exact to what's hitting this. It's a 1-to-1 gain, if that makes any sense. If I have it set to 2, let's say I set this to 2, now the signal is going to be twice as loud because I'm multiplying that signal by 2. And you got to be careful. If you're dealing with audio, you can clip stuff out. So I'd recommend starting at 1 if you're playing with VCAs, because then you have a little bit of headroom if you're adding more than one oscillator. Even half that, maybe like 0.5. It's up to you. There's no rules. You'll hear if you're clipping it out. So you can't blow anything up. It's all internal. So no worries, right? So here's another example where, okay, I have my really simple monosynth here. But I have no envelope, like ADSR shape, to that VCA. It's just the gate. So not too exciting, right? So all I have to do is go back into this level subchain, and instead of that gate going directly through, let's have this gate trigger an ADSR unit. So if we go Insert, we can skim down to Envelopes. And let me find it. There we go. ADSR. Now, this gate signal is hitting this ADSR, and the output is going to be a proper envelope shape. So now I can use my traditional controls of an envelope. And that envelope, if we scroll to the right of it, you can sort of see the envelope shape there. And you can finagle with this stuff in real time. Oh, too much. So here's where it gets even more rabbit hole-y. So right now we're still in the subchain of that VCA. I can create another subchain within this subchain. So let's say, what if I want to use my KB37 wheel, my modulation wheel, to control this release time? No problem. Same thing as before. I just select it. We have the subchain for that parameter right down here. And I can go into there. I can assign. I can look at my scope. I'm wiggling my my modulation wheel. You can see the light up the higher I go. I can go in there and I can say I want A3. So same thing as before. I have this modulation wheel data right here. but it's not going to assign that. It's not going to affect this release parameter until I apply some gain to this subchain. Otherwise, at 0, it's letting none of it pass through to affect that little fader. So I'm just going to wiggle that modulation, and I'm just going to turn up this gain at the same time. And usually I set my modulation wheel to the maximum setting, so it's at its highest point, and then I can sort of adjust the ceiling of where I want this release time to sit. See, already that's too high. That's pretty good. Let's say that's the furthest or the highest I'd want that release parameter to be. Now when I turn down this modulation wheel on the outside, you can see I have my lowest and my highest set. So perfect. So there you go. So now we have if we back out, we have our saw on the first subchain. If we go into the level VCA, we have a gate hitting this ADSR, and on a subchain of the release parameter, we can go in there and we have my external modulation wheel assigned. But it doesn't have to be anything external. It could be something internal. So I could go back in here, and what if instead of my wheel, I just wanted a sine wave doing that? All I'd have to do is just insert a unit here from the inside, and that in turn will affect that release fader. So I'm going to go to, where is it here? Oscillators, sine oscillator. I'm going to slow this down. There's my cat again. So now, check that out. But you'll notice that it goes below 0 because the sine wave is bipolar. So we can fix that pretty easily. You can see it's going below the center point. We could insert an offset unit, and let's go to 0.5, and now we're completely above the 0 line. So if we back out, there we go. Now we have this sort of fluctuating release time. I mean, that's not the most ideal parameter to do that with, but I just wanted to show you that you can do that. So actually, here's a good example. You know what? I've changed my mind. I don't want any of this stuff anymore. So all I have to do is just hover to the main header of that unit. Notice I got bypass, delete, replace. I'm just going to hit S2 to delete that. And I'm going to delete this as well. And just so you can see, I still have that A3 assigned, but because the sine oscillator doesn't have an audio input, this unit is essentially blocking that signal. So the moment I bypass this or delete it, that A3 signal will pass through this chain. So I'm going to hit delete, and there's my signal again. So we're sort of back to where we were. So just a few more little navigation things here. Let's say we're on this saw, and we don't want to see all these parameters anymore. We've sort of set and forget everything. We're happy with it. And maybe we just want more visual space to see another unit at the same time. If you go over the header, if you hit enter, it collapses it down into this little blob. If you hit enter again over it, it'll expand it. Another thing you can do, just for some housekeeping, is if you press the M key where the header is, notice that the arrow is sort of bouncing up and down. That's telling us that there is a submenu of parameters there. So if we hit the M key, it's giving us a few little things here. So we got rename unit. So instead of aliasing saw, I could just rename this. And look, it's laid out pretty self-explanatory. I can highlight over a letter I want. If I press this M key, that will give me an O. I can hit backspace here to clear it out. If I hold down Shift, that will give me the capital O. So I'm just going to draw in OSC for oscillator, and I'll just put a number 1 there. And it doesn't show us here, but when you're done doing something, just press Enter, and that will take us out. And notice that this unit is now called oscillator 1. There is a few other things here. I'm not going to get into these right now. We'll leave that till another video once you get up to speed with everything. Actually, another good thing to notice to mention here is, so we have this oscillator 1 that I've created, and it has, it has that gate assignment and the ADSR and the portamento and all that stuff. I can save this as a preset, and I could call this, you know what, it defaults to the name of the oscillator, so I'll just save it as OSC1. So the cool thing is, let's say I've changed my mind with everything and I just want to erase this. So two ways you can do it. If I had a whole bunch of stuff here, I could go here right at the beginning of this outermost out one chain and hit clear, and that will just wipe out everything. Or if I want to erase this unit specifically, I can just highlight over it and hit delete. So I've done that. There's no undo at this point. So let's say I'm like, oh man, you know what? I want to, maybe this is like a few days later and you're like, I want to recreate that oscillator I made before. So I can just go to the aliasing saw and I can hover over that header again. I can go load preset, and there it is, os1.unit. And there we are. It recalls that exact unit. It has our original naming. And notice that it's also saved our subchains and our assignments everywhere. So I've just saved myself a ton of time because maybe I want to use this to build a big synth. So here's an example. The next thing you can do is, I'm just going to delete this again. I can insert a different kind of unit here. And you'll find you'll use these a lot. It's called a mixer channel. So I'm going to add one of those. And the idea is, you can have multiple mixer channels on a chain, and within them you can have audio feeding. So you can basically sum a bunch of signals together instead of just a single left to right process. So if I add two mixer channels, if I go into the first one here, I can insert our saw. I'm going to load that preset. So there's my oscillator 1's coming in there. In this one, I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to load that, the same preset. But I'm going to detune this second oscillator slightly. So I'm going to go to Fine. I'm going to select this. So now we have a slightly detuned oscillator. And I'll just, notice how I was selected. If I hit up, it unselects it so I can skim around again. I'm going to go here. I'm going to rename this, and I'm just going to save that as oscillator 2. And I'm also going to go back here and just save that as a preset. So now I have a slightly different tuning. It's probably better to label these more descriptively, but just for the sake of this video and saving time, I'll just call that oscillator 2. So now we have two mixers. I can adjust the balance of these. I could name these if I want. I can also mute and solo. And you can visually see that if I solo, the other one temporarily sort of grays out slightly and the meter sort of disappears. The other important thing to know about these mixer channels is you can't CV control or externally control these volumes. These are set and forget values that you have to manually adjust. But if you want to be able to automate those volumes, you can always add a VCA within. You can either use a VCA if it's an oscillator on the oscillator, or you can actually add a VCA after it as a separate thing. So just keep that in mind if you're adding mixer channels. Here's another navigation thing that's kind of interesting. If I am in a chain, I can actually highlight something and copy and paste it. So let's say I want to add one more oscillator, but I don't want to go through all that work of loading presets and all that stuff. I can literally just hold down Shift while I'm in between a unit. And if I move this to the right, notice that this highlights now. And this is really important. So if I let go of Shift, it's going to say, what do you want to do? Do you want to copy, cut, or move to mixer? For this situation, I'm going to say copy. And now notice as I'm navigating around, I can hit paste. So I can basically paste an exact copy of this right beside it. So now I have 3 oscillators running. This mixer 3 is exactly the same as what's in mixer channel 2. So I'll go into number 3, and I'm going to detune this slightly the other way. So now I have a 3 oscillator saw. And all these 3 signals are being mixed into this chain's output. You can see it right there. And then maybe after all that, why not just add an audio effect of some sort? Or actually, you know what? Maybe I'll add a filter. Got the cue. I know in proper synthesis this should have been before VCA, but I'm just experimenting. Why not? There's no rules, right? So maybe I want the filter to track with my pitch CV, so I can go to the volt per octave for that. I can go to its subchain, assign this to the same CV. So now it's tracking properly. And notice with the tuning, there is no gain. It's smart enough to know that we're using tuning, so we don't need to apply gain. You can still play with the volt per octave here, and it will just add that to whatever your subchain value is. So if I want this to be an octave higher, I just up that an octave. Not too noticeable here, but let's back out. Let's go to one of these oscillators here, and I'll just show you here. If I can apply it's pretty much like a voltage offset for the pitch control, but it's dealt with in sense, so it's in a very musical way. So I could have one of these oscillators detuned or pitch an octave up as an example. So or maybe I want it to be like a fifth. So whatever you want to do. So you know what? I'm going to leave it set to an octave lower. So we have 2 octaves, or we have 2 oscillators at 1 octave, and one of our oscillators is an octave lower, just to beef it up a little bit. And then maybe after this, I want to add, we can add an actual audio effect. Let's try a delay. So I can up our delay, up some feedback. Probably a bit too small. So notice as I'm doing this, it's all in real time. I don't have to wait. It's not causing any clicks or weirdness. I can just play around and dial in something I like. If I don't want this as an example, I can delete it. Maybe I'll instead insert, I think there's a reverb here. Let's add this free verb. So we have that control. Now let's say I'm done with this whole thing, and maybe I don't want that all on my primary, like sort of track 1. I can actually hold down shift here, select this entire thing, let go, and it says, hey, you got 5 units here. And I can say, you know what, move that entire thing to a mixer. So it's going to take the entire thing we just made and pop it up a level or down a level into a mixer channel. So now all the stuff we just did is sitting on this mixer channel here. So I can go into this, I can rename it. I can go shift shift 0 to clear it. I'll just call this synth. Why not? And there you go. On this one strip, we have this little thing here called synth. And the only thing we have controlled right now is just that mod wheel adjusting that release time. But you could have all this stuff patched, doing something crazy. But just for this video, I've done something really simple. Here's another example, just an important concept. So let's go back into our synth. So I'm just going to go into this channel mixer. I'm going to go into its subchain. And I'm just going to bypass some of these right now, because I just want to demonstrate another concept here that's kind of important. So I'm going to go into this. Here's our oscillator. Just going to show you something. So we have our pitch CV. Another thing you can do, and there's no real rules to this, but I just want to show you that you can do this, is you can mix CV together. And it's using the same process with those, or the same concept as with those channel mixers. So if I say insert channel mixer, notice how it's bubbled to the top because we've used it a bunch of times. So here's a channel mixer. I'm just going to turn it down. And within that, let's just add a sine wave oscillator. And I think I have to scroll down to find it. Sine wave. I'm going to set this below audio rates to, let's say, like, I guess 4.861 hertz. Or if I was being really finicky, I can go below this bias setting here. I can get the big setting here. And check this out, I can go 0 right side. So I can just say, okay, 4. Done. So now our sine wave oscillator is running at exactly 4 hertz. There it is. I can actually mix that with our CV control now. And there you go. So now we've figured out a way to introduce a vibrato to our pitch CV signal. And let's try something else. So far we've had our A3 modulation wheel assigned just to one thing, just to our release time. Let's assign that to multiple destinations, because you can do that. And I'm just going to pause for a second because my video time is running out, and I'll start again. 1 second. So far, our wheel is just controlling that release time. Not too exciting. But what if we have it controlling the release time, but we're also controlling the speed of that sine wave? We can easily achieve that. So let's go into this mixer channel here. And you know what? Mixer channel doesn't mean anything to me in the scope of working on something. So let's rename that. Let's call that, I'll just call this VIB for vibrato. And then that makes more sense in my working scenario. It's like, oh yeah, this mixer channel is my vibrato source. So you can see it, cool. I'm gonna go in here. So there's 2 ways we can do it. If we were doing this exact pitch, like 1 volt per octave, we could use this. But I want to just be able to control the frequency speed directly. So within the subchain of our frequency, I'm just going to assign the wheel. So same thing as before. I want to use my A3. You can see it. And now I'm going to apply my gain to figure out what I want it to sound like. And again, for this, if you're working with a joystick or like a touchpad or a wheel or something, I'd recommend setting it to the maximum setting, because then you have the highest you'd ever want it to be. So we can pick our ceiling and then it will just calculate all the in-between automatically. So here's our sound with our base amount of vibrato. I'm gonna up my wheel to full, which is, you can see it on the scope. So that's actually 5 volts, that line. And I'm gonna just increase the gain using our fine adjust to something, the maximum I'd ever want that to be. So you notice how I don't have a lot of control here. Maybe I want 15. So again, I could, where it says gain, I can press under it, I can go here and I can dial in exactly what I want that to be. So 15, 15. And there you go. So if my wheel's at full, it's gonna sound like that. If my wheel is at nothing, it's gonna be our default point I have my fader set to. So there you go. So now if I'm playing and my wheel's down, I have my 4 Hertz vibrato. If I up this wheel, it's going to get faster and my release time is going to increase as well. So that's kind of cool. We have our goofy little synth here, but at least we're seeing how all the routing works, right? So here's another kind of scenario you might run into. Let's say I have my ADSR here, and I want that ADSR to also control my filter's cutoff. So I don't know if I remember, I don't remember if I bypassed that filter, if I deleted it. So let's add another one right beside it here. And I'm just going to add low pass filter. I'll add my pitch tracking again. So we have consistency in our timbre. But I want to be able to control our frequency, or cutoff frequency, with that same envelope. So there's 2 things you could do here. Remember our copy and paste thing? We could go into this level control. I could hold down Shift and highlight this. I could copy it. I could back out. I could go to our ladder filter, go to the subchain here, and paste that in. And then I just have to reassign my gate. And that's not oh yeah, see, I made a mistake. I didn't implement any gain. So if I want a 1-to-1 gain, I have to make sure that's set to 1. And let's just double check and see what's going on here. I'm gonna have to adjust our initial filter cutoff. Oh, did I adjust the gain on the wrong thing? I did. That was my mistake. So I didn't adjust the gain on our filter cutoff. I turned it up on our resonance, which won't do anything. So, and notice how if the resonance is too high, we will get self-oscillation, which is good. But let's go back to our cutoff frequency and implement the gain. There we go. And at this point, you just have to adjust this to taste. Like, what do you like the sound of, you know? You know what, that ADSR is a bit too slow for my taste, so... And notice that our A3 assignment from our wheel is still set up there. So if I don't want that assignment there anymore, I can just go into that subchain and I can just hit clear. And now it's just going to be based on whatever these are set at. Just a hard setting. Sort of set and forget. Now, if I was actually recording this audio, it's way more high fidelity. I'm just listening to it out of this little speaker off to the right here. So that's one way. You can have 2 independent ADSRs. But what if I wanted it to be exactly the same? So let's do that. I'm just going to clear out this ADSR. So this is where the rabbit hole really sort of goes deep. So you can get some really interesting things happening depending on how crazy you want to get. So remember our input assign? I still want something to control this, this frequency of this filter. So I'm going to go into my input assign here for the chain. Instead of jacks, I'm going to press locals. And this is the first time you're going to see this screen. So locals, this is going to give us a visual representation of everything we have set up in the system. Each line is a subchain deeper. So remember, if you can remember, synth was our channel mixer. Within that, we had a mixer channel, and within that, we had our oscillator 1. And on that voltage per octave control, we have a slew limiter that's processing our A2 input, and that's feeding into a mixer called, oh, and then we've incorporated a mixer called Vibrato, and within that, we have a sine wave oscillator, and the frequency of that sine wave is being controlled by A3. So this at a bird's eye view, will show you everything that's happening in the system. And you basically just use the big encoder and just navigate it around, and it's going to show us everything. So that's why it's a good reason. That's a good reason to label everything. Otherwise, you might get lost if everything is called channel mixer or if everything is called sine wave. Like, really get into the habit of labeling things. Like, you can see the third copy of my oscillator, I didn't rename it to oscillator 3. It's still called oscillator 2. So just be mindful of that kind of thing for organization. But what I really want to get at is, so we're looking at all this, but the most amazing thing about it is we can tap signals from anywhere to control that filter cutoff. So if I want my envelope, let me find it. It was the VCA. The VCA's ADSR is right here. If I highlight over that and press enter, now that signal is going to also control this piece right here. And notice, you can see it right here. They're both identical. So the source is identical, but then after that, we could add some additional processing, or maybe I want the gain on this one slightly more drastic. But it's still tapping off that ADSR within that subchain. So if I, again, because the release of that's assigned to my wheel, we have that control. So it's really powerful. Like, once you start doing, you set up your sort of initial setup, and then you can go in and grab whatever you need. So another good example of that is, so we have two oscillators detuned from each other. Let's go into our second mixer channel here. What if I wanted to sync this second oscillator, oscillator number 1? We do it the same way. This sync input is expecting another oscillator feed, so we can do that. I can say, okay, I'm going to go into the sync subchain, and I'm going to go to our input assign, and instead of jacks, I want to see locals, and let's hover over to oscillator number 1. And the idea is, if you highlight the entire thing, our scopes, that's the output of that entire chain. And that's what I want to use to sync, to have oscillator 2 sync to oscillator number 1. I want oscillator 1 signal. So I have that highlighted, or I have the little cursor over it. I'm going to hit enter. And there you go, oscillator 1. So we can listen, we can double check and make sure this works. Definitely working. So very cool. What if I want to use that same vibrato that same LFO that's doing our vibrato to control our frequency of our second oscillator? I can go into empty subchain of this frequency. I can go to our input assign, go to locals. I'm going to find it, and see, I didn't label it, so it's probably just going to say sine oscillator. There it is. You can see it. I'm just going to grab that signal. I'm going to hit enter. And then you got to remember to turn up your gain. And remember, that LFO speed is being controlled by the wheel. So we have multiple modulation thingies happening all at the same time from an external source all throughout this patch we've made, controlling parameters in different ways. And that is the true power of this module. You can have all this stuff happening really fast to navigate, set it up, and create something useful. So now we have our sort of synth setup here. Maybe I'll add a reverb after it again. A bit too much. We have our ridiculous synth. This whole chain on the parentmost level of out 1, I can now save this whole thing as a preset. I'll call it new file. I'll call it, let's just call it Neil just for some fun. And there we go. This chain is saved. So if I clear this out and I'm starting again another day, I don't have to worry about anything. I can just go to output number 1, or you know what, let's say I'm patched to out 2. I could have something happening on out 1 completely different, and on track 2, I could go here, I could go load, I can load up my Neil chain, and it's gonna build that entire thing automatically. And there it is. And on track number 1, output number 1, I can have something completely independent happening at the same time. So that's the power of it. You can have a whole bunch of things on one chain in mixers, or you could organize it into separate outputs if you want to feed your external modular stuff in different ways. The choice is yours. But I hope that's enough just to get going, to navigate around and explore. If you have any questions, just leave a comment in the video comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But until then, happy tweaking, happy patching, and all that good stuff. So take it easy. Bye.